me saying, don't be put off by the fact that you've got to spend this money on this because it's not dead money. That money still exists. It's not like a PlayStation
because
game.
you're buying an asset in many. It's like the same as buying a house, isn't it? You're buying an asset.
Hey guys, welcome back to the next episode of Battle Chads. As you can see, we have a lovely, lovely guest with us, Wally. And
Hello.
Your usual two, myself and Josh, the drib and drab, just chilling around.
Hello everyone, how you doing?
How you doing today, Wally?
Very, very good. Thank you for inviting me on. I've been looking forward to this conversation. It should be a fun one, actually, because it's one that's quite near and dear to my heart and also to my co-host Christian's heart. So I'll let you tee up the topic anyway. I won't steal your thunder.
Rightio. So why don't you introduce what we're talking about today, Josh?
So today's topic, or this week's topic, we're going to talk about the stigma between competitive Magic with the casual sort of community. And we've noticed that with the Commander scene being Commander being the most played paper format, a lot of times we come across the rhetoric where people don't like to try competitive Magic because either they're scared or they're intimidated, which is horrendous to think that the Magic community can feel this way in any aspect of the game. But also maybe it's just not, maybe it's not for them, or they won't gain anything from doing it. And we're trying to use this pod as a way to get people to try competitive Magic and also identify the facts that casual and competitive are basically best friends and you should play them together.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with you there, Josh. So maybe just to give a quick spiel about my own source of experience of playing Magic. So I got into the game when Arena came out on the iPad. So that was around the same time as Strixhaven released. So it's a few years ago now. So I played games of Magic prior to that with friends, with Christian, but it was only when it came out on Arena on the iPad, I actually sort of got to the point where I owned my own cards and built my own decks and stuff. And obviously on Arena, I've been playing primarily Standard, but there was never sort of any question in my head about whether I was going to get into any format personally other than Commander. And I think that was really solidified by the fact that Brawl existed on Arena as well. So I found a Commander that I particularly enjoyed playing. And therefore, obviously, it's a 60-card format and it's standard cards, but ultimately you build something fairly similar in Commander with 100 cards. So that's sort of how I got into paper Magic. And it was only sort of further down the line, I guess, and maybe in the last year specifically, that I've actually been going into 1v1 formats. So obviously, you'll actually see footage of me online on the Chad Magic YouTube channel where we play primarily Commander, but there is footage on me there of playing Pioneer quite badly, but also playing Pauper with a fairly high level of success. So I have been trying these formats and I actually find them really enjoyable. And I think, a podcast like this, hopefully people listen to it and maybe it just gives them that additional push to get down to the LGS for, I'm not saying get straight into Modern and drop £1,000 on a deck, but get down there, maybe borrow a deck off somebody for Pioneer or Pauper or Standard or something like that. Just go give it a go, essentially. And, we can go through all the reasons why that's good now. But anyway, that's my own experience, and hopefully other people can follow me down this path.
That makes sense. It's I'm glad to see that you were able to beat the good old Arena Stockholm syndrome. The Arena babies for Magic are vast in number. We never get to see them down at the shop, so I'm glad to see that you were able to beat that stigma and join us in the social circle that is Magic the Gathering at your
Absolutely.
local game store.
Well, the Gathering is literally 2/3 of it. So, yeah, if you're going to go by that kind of metric. And I think I was lucky in the sense that I had friends who were into paper Magic. So they'd come round to mine and maybe instead of doing D&D one evening, we'd do a draft or something like that. And obviously Limited is a whole other thing that I didn't even touch on when I was talking before. And that's a whole other 1v1 format that people might be interested to get into. But ultimately, it was Commander that really captured my heart. And I think that seems to be the experience for a lot of people getting into Magic now, primarily because Commander is being so pushed by Wizards, but also just because of, I suppose the format maybe is just a little bit less scary. Because firstly, it's a social format. And secondly, in terms of deck building, I think a Commander deck is a lot more forgiving. Because, in a Commander deck, if you have 99 cards that synergize with your commander and you've got the right mana base. And when I say the right mana base, what I really mean there is just enough lands. They could all be basic lands, for example. Then you're probably going to find a way to accrue value and get into the game. Whereas you simply can't do that for competitive Magic because you're not unlikely to have play sets of the cards that you need in order to build a viable deck for any of the formats, unless you've absolutely rinsed a single set and you just happen to pick up 4 very powerful cards. You're unlikely to have, for example, 4 Shieldred lying around. And if you need to build that sort of deck, well, that's £250 you've got to go and drop on cards. So I think for me, that's probably why Commander seems to be the entry point these days. I don't know if that's right, but that's my thoughts on it anyway.
I think one of the reasons that Commander become so relevant as the entry level format is because the format literally saved the paper game during COVID. Like we touched about a bit of the subject when we in our previous pod on Standard, that Standard died. Well, paper. So I say Standard, I mean paper. Standard died during the COVID era because, well, no one could play. The Gathering, 2/3 of the game, as you rightly said, was dead for that period, and people were just, well, I don't know, let's just build commander decks because for one reason that you just said is that it's really forgiving to build, but also I could play these commander decks over the webcams or on the kitchen tables with a family member or something like that, and it was a really casual way to still engage with the paper format. And Wizards had obviously identified with this, and it's been shown in their sort of set designs and the cards the way they designed clearly for Commander because it sells the packs.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think you can see, I mean, I'm talking about command decks being very forgiving to build. You can build one on just out of the cards you have lying around. But actually, you can walk into your LGS and buy a commander deck that's already built and, potentially very powerful out the box as well. Because precons are definitely getting more and more powerful. I noticed the power creep starting with Phyrexia or Will Be One when there were reprints like Flawless Maneuver, which is a really powerful CEDH card, and lots of other things that I was surprised to see as well. So you have in a box, all you need to buy, you don't even need sleeves. I personally don't think everybody should have a sleeveless deck. But anyway, come back in off that tangent. It's literally just add sleeves, shuffle it up, and you've got a deck that is probably going to be viable and you're going to be able to enjoy playing in any pod. Because, and obviously, Pioneer Challenger decks exist. They're called Challenger decks, aren't they?
Yeah, the Challenger decks, yeah.
So you can get precons for 1v1 formats, but they're just not going to stand up at a night in the LGS because, firstly, it doesn't have the expensive lands that most of these formats rely on, especially now with, for example, Cavern of Souls being in Standard and Pioneer being a Shockland format, Modern being a Fetchland format. Those precons are just not going to stand up at the table. You're not going to have a good night with them. Whereas a precon, as a Commander night, you're going to be able to play and you're probably going to win games because of how Commander is inherently self-policing. And people will target the person at the table who they might potentially have a very powerful deck and they're running away with the game. So the other 3 focus them down. Meanwhile, I'm sat in the corner with my precon going under the radar and nick it at the end. And, if you watch the Commander episodes on the channel, that's quite often what happens. It's the person who doesn't do much through the game who ends up winning it. So, yeah, it's quite easy to, I think, just pick up and play for Commander, whereas you need to actually put thought into buying cards and assembling a deck for 1v1. So, I mean, we're going through all the reasons why this is scary, and we should start to address these as well. But interested to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point in the way that Wizards have structured things to be on how to introduce new players. It was during COVID that did happen, where for some reason Commander became the mainstay of how you enter Magic. But I do think that has caused a lot of issues for the game. Because you have your arena players and then you have your commander players, and they won't come down to actually play the 60-card format paper Magic game. And it needs to stay alive for the game to actually continue as well. They all need each other. It's not just one or the other. You can't have just one. You need all things to be together, at least paper Magic wise. Arena is kind of an animal in and of itself, but we'll touch on that as we go on. And it's interesting how Wizards has decided to actually make these decks be made, because they have the tools and they have the resources really to make the Challenger decks be more powerful and be more mainstays and be things that happen consistently instead of randomly 1 or 2 years and then go away for another 2 or 3 years because reasons. It's something I really wish Wizards would clamp down on to help new players get into the game. Personally, I think that some of the challenger decks were actually quite strong. We had it when I think it was the Phoenix Lotus Field, Mono White, and the Demir decks were built. The Demir one didn't really make sense because it wasn't a deck at the time. Mono White was ready to play right out of the box. It was really, really good. You could win your standard FNM quite well with it. The deck was, it was mostly plains anyway, so the land base didn't matter. And it was powerful to do its thing. The Phoenix deck was strong, a little weird. They only included 2 Phoenixes instead of 4. I didn't get that. And then they had expressive...
That's point, isn't it? That to include the extra 2 Phoenixes, that then makes either you're going to knacker the secondary market, which Wizards claims not to recognize, but they clearly do because their actions demonstrate that they do, or you make the deck unaccessibly expensive.
The real issue was, while Phoenix wasn't a completely inexpensive card, it didn't cost anything. It was like 2, maybe 3 quid for a Phoenix.
Oh, really? Okay.
The issue was the expressive iterations. The deck had all the expressive iterations, but expressive iteration was banned in the format. So they made a rule where you can play expressive iteration legally in your deck as long as you don't change a single card out of the precon.
Oh.
So you could play the full precon with 4 expressive iteration, but only 2 Phoenixes, which made not a whole lot of sense. Or you could add the 2 Phoenixes and start adding little bits, but you couldn't play the expressive iterations anymore.
I think this is where those precons failed, though, because I actually think the precon was a brilliant concept idea. I actually all for it. I think they should bring something out for even things like Pauper to make it really cheap to get into the game. Like I do think those decks are really good. Where they don't translate well is one, the deck selection, like what decks you actually pick, because there's that blue black one that you mentioned before. I think it was blue black. Can't remember. Like what is that deck? Like people are not going to do. 2, like Lotus Field combo. What new person is going to pick up Lotus Field combo and pilot that? Like insane.
Yeah.
But also like with this rule of like you're banning one card and then except there's little rules and here and there. If you're a new player, you're not going to be in the click with Magic Discourse. You're probably not going to follow Wizards of the Coast on Twitter. You're probably not going to get any information beyond on the game beyond the fact that I've turned up and I want to try it. And it's these things that like these little micro decisions that all on top of other micro decisions that encourage the person to be like, you know what, I'm just going to stay at home and let Arena play the game for me because I'm a paper Magic and MTGO truther. I don't think Arena is Magic. Arena's like Magic on easy mode. Like to me, it's not really the game.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Why would you go out to the LGS when you can sit at home? And why would you go to LGS playing a game where the rules are different in paper for some reason than they are at home? And plus, why am I spending all this money on these cards when I've only just got into the format, or I've only just got into the game during COVID and I don't own any cards?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think the situation is that if you got into it over COVID and maybe you bought yourself a few packs because, people aren't going out and they've got a bit of spare money, it's very easy to throw a commander deck together from just that chaff, basically. Yeah. But to circle back around to the point about the expressive iterations, I think that actually has the risk of creating a situation where somebody tries to get into 1v1 and is ultimately put off. Because maybe they buy this, is it Phoenix Precon, and think, this is playing quite well, and actually I'm going to stick an extra Phoenix in this to power it up. But they don't realize expressive iteration's banned or is only legal in that very specific deck concentration. And then suddenly they're playing 3 Phoenixes in expressive iteration and they're disqualified from the competition for reasons that they didn't know existed. So,
because it is definitely something that came up when they made the precons. Because when the precons had already been created, iteration wasn't banned at the time, but when they were finally released, it was. Obviously, Wizard wasn't expecting iteration to be banned. It's the first time it's ever happened. They didn't address it in the best way, I think. I think they should have found a way to help the players that did buy into that precon still be able to play with the cards they bought. obviously the easiest way for them to alleviate the issue was, one, not include only 2 Phoenixes, because that was dumb. Yes, it's a mythic card, but it costs a quid 50, 2 quid, whatever at the time. It was nothing. And they could have addressed that much better than how they did. Thankfully, some of the other decks were very functional. They did what they said on the tin. You could play them at F&M level, no problem, and do just fine. Maybe win, maybe just have a few wins, and there was no issue. Now, what was very positive about them is when you bought those precons, you could easily upgrade them if you were a little more invested of a player, and make them competitively viable to a proper standard. The Phoenix deck had a lot of the mainstay cards. It had plenty of them to make the deck work. The mono white had basically every card, minus maybe a Thalia, maybe a Lieutenant or two, something like that. Very cheap to get those cards overall and build the deck properly. The Demir one, while it wasn't a proper deck, had many tools. It had 4 memory deluges. It had, I think, 2 or 3 Hall of Storm Giants. Mainstay cards in the format. And it was a cheap way to get them. Most of them didn't really drop that much in price, and it felt like a good deal. It was 25, 30 pounds, maybe a little more in some places for the decks, and you got a good bundle of mainstay staple cards for Pioneer. They did a similar thing in Standard, and it worked just fine. I think the year prior was like the Mono Red Prowess deck. That was a really good one. It had 4 Monastery Swift Spear, 4 Soulscar Mage, a lot of the stuff.
The standard ones were good.
And they were very, very good for what they were. Yeah. I wish Wizards would commit to printing these decks every single season like they do for Commander decks every single year. Because they're not that expensive.
Not just every single year, every single set.
Yeah, every single set, sorry. Every single set nowadays.
3 for some reason.
I don't think there's any reason. They'd have to do, 3 or 4 sets of Challenger decks every season. They could just pick the 4 most played, the 4 most popular, or even just pick, of that year, the 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. So 12 different decks total.
Do you guys play any other card games, or is it just Magic? And there's a reason to ask this question.
Mostly just Magic. I have played like Hearthstone and little things like that, but I never wanted to invest into other paper games.
I got into, believe it or not, Digimon a bit.
Okay.
About 6-7 months ago, and you know what? Don't knock it. It's a really fun game. And Digimon and I think Lorcana is the same. So they're pre-con decks. If you buy 2 of these pre-con decks and you mash them together, so you have the play sets. So say 2 are the same, mash them together, you get a competitive deck. Now I think that's fair, because I think the pre-cons were like maybe less than £20. And I think the Challenger decks were like £30, I think, something along those lines.
That region, yeah.
But if you took that same model, £60, and you bought these 2 decks, mashed them together, so fit to make the 2 odds, the 4 odds, and all that good stuff, mash them together, and you get a competitive deck for £60. I think that is actually great for the consumer, because £60 for a competitive deck, Standard or Pioneer, is great value for money, considering when you look at the price of PlayStation games. But also you then get additional cards left over for potentially using other decks. So you have like multiples of cantrips or whatever other cards there are in there, or lands or whatever. So you get a competitive deck plus for the price of 2 decks. Now I think that is probably more reasonable. And then you said with the Phoenix deck, I'm pretty sure at the time you probably could have just got 2 of those decks. Had your playset of Phoenix, had your playset of cantrips, took out the expensive iterations, and you've got the deck good to go, or pretty much there good to go. So in a vacuum, looking at the individual sort of product, it's probably not the best value for money or the best experience for the player. But this is where the experience of buying product comes. Well, if I mash them both together, then I've got a deck. And that's what other card games are doing.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense to what I wanted to kind of talk about. I want Wizards to, even if they ignore anything past Standard in terms of the Challenger decks, I'd be happy for them to only make Standard Challenger decks every single season. That would be so good for the game, because it would inject new players.
Yes.
The cards that are, let's be honest, the Standard cards these days are so powerful, they always enter other formats.
Yeah. That
these cards can now be bought by invested players to, make their collections a little bigger, their staples for whatever format it is that they do play come into light. So it makes sense for them to do something like this, not only for their own back pocket, which we all know Wizards cares about, but for the health of the game and the player base. That's exactly what I think they need to do.
It would attract the casual players, right?
Exactly,
because the casual players come to an LGS,
exactly.
they buy the pre-con. So every season they have these standard pre-con decks. They come in, you buy your pre-con, you play your deck, and it only has to be F&M good. It doesn't have to be RC level good. It has to be F&M good, right? At a minimum, it needs to be able to 3-0 and F&M if the player could obviously do it. So looking at that sort of idea, that sort of metric, that'd be a great idea that Wizards could do to bring casual players into the competitive format, but we don't have that right now. That doesn't exist.
Because it's the pick up and play aspect for me, because it's about having the deck pitched at the right level, but also having the ability to access it in the first place. So we're very lucky in our LGS that if I wanted to go, I mean, it's been Pioneers night tonight when we were recording this, but if I wanted to go, there would be 4 or 5 people who would be desperate to lend me their deck for the evening, and they take it as a personal insult if I took somebody else's over there.
Hey man, I know I'm big, but like 4 or 5 people, come on, man.
It has actually been primarily Luis I've borrowed decks off when I've been actually. So Christian, I'd often play his mono white humans, but Luis, I think I've had your Golgari Rock. I've had one of your Izzet decks as well. And so, I mean, I don't know if it's like that at every LGS, but I mean, that would be one piece of advice I'd give to people looking to get into 1v1. Get added to the community WhatsApp group or Discord or whatever it is, and just say, hey guys, can I borrow a deck tonight, please? Because generally I think Magic players are quite kind and friendly in that respect.
Yeah.
And people, they love to see their deck being played because it's good. Otherwise the cards are just sat in a box not being used, and nobody wants that.
Yeah. So, and to anyone listening, right, I know it's not always the same in every region, depending where you're at. It can be a little tough to trust people. But if you know your player base and you have the resources to lend a deck, I highly recommend it, especially for when players are coming to try the format. You want them to come back and keep playing. And I think it's a healthy thing to do. Magic is an expensive game. Like it or not, it is.
Yes.
And the more you can help somebody else in just playing and starting to play the game, the better. I'm not saying give them a deck. I'm saying lend them a deck. Yeah. Let them try the format. See if they actually enjoy it, so they know whether they want to invest some money into it or not. And plus, people need to invest to actually play.
If you're doing that as well, you're also building decks, which is one of the fun things of Magic. If you committed to one deck that you're going to play for the RC season or whatever, but you like the thought of playing Golgari or other sort of decks that you're playing, then if you build those decks, then you can vicariously see how this world doing by lending it to your friends. Yeah. And also you have a testing partner. So if you want, I don't know, I want to really hone my skills I want the Phoenix versus whatever matchup, then you build Phoenix and then build whatever matchup you want to sort of practice against and give it to your friend.
So you heard it from Josh there. Use new players and your friends as lab rats for the new.
Yeah, if you really want to meta game everything like I do, you build a deck that beats every deck you've built to lend out, and it really helps your stats. It's fantastic.
And also, I think what you'll probably find is as long as people do have the personal resources to go and invest in cards, if they're borrowing a deck off somebody and they play it week in, for a few weeks, and for all they've built the same deck on Arena or MTGO as well, I think they would very quickly start to invest in the cards. Because I think most decks, actually, I can't think of any in Pioneer or Standard that have more than maybe 8 or 9 cards that are quite expensive. Obviously, when you start going into decks that include Shieldreds, that becomes certainly taken to a new level. But often, a lot of the cards you can pick up most of the deck for £20 perhaps. I mean, maybe one of you is going to tell me I'm completely wrong by saying that, but
no, you can definitely pick up most shells of decks for anywhere between £20 to £50. It'll have the cantrips, all the low cost stuff. It's not until you start including the shock lands and the mainstay big important creature. Those are the ones that cost a little more. Sometimes though, you can get away with playing slightly powered down versions and still be functional. I personally think the most important thing to ever invest into a deck is the mana base. I think it's what makes your deck function and makes it feel fun, and keeps you away from frustrating nights of I couldn't cast any spells because I just drew the wrong stuff. the mana base will help a lot with those kind of issues. But most decks, whether they're tier 1, tier 2, whatever tier you want to play, have some functional way of building them on a budget. You really can. Even something like Amalia combo, you don't have to have all the Court of Callings and super expensive pieces. In fact, most of Amalia isn't that expensive. I think it's Thought Seizes that are expensive.
I don't think
Cord.
it plays that many, does it?
No, it's not. A lot of the deck is actually not that expensive. I think the mana base is the most expensive pieces of that deck, but the actual other surrounding main things are not. Amalia herself is cheap as chips. It doesn't cost anything.
I think when you're looking at decks as well,
certainly, yeah, it's the mana base that costs the money. Obviously, in standard, I mean, well, actually, that's Cavern of Souls being in standard completely threw that all out the window. But in general, the mana bases in standard weren't that expensive.
Yeah, they weren't.
I think when you're looking at decks and you're picking those, particularly if you want to get into multi-formats, you want to sort of like buy cards that you can use across different formats. So, for example, the Shocklands, they cover Pioneer and Modern. The sort of things that you want to be looking for that are more expensive sort of translate well. It's when you look at things like Shieldred. Yeah, it's really expensive, but you play that in standard, you can play it in Pioneer, and you can play it in Modern, and it's even played in Legacy if you get that far. Things that are a bit weird, like your mana confluences. I'm just looking at here, like mana confluences is only really seen in Pioneer, and it's like it says here $188 for a playset on MTG Gold.
Yeah, you don't need that card. You just replace it with a basic most of the time, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to bring it back to sort of the commander to 1v1 pathway. Yeah. All these expensive lands and the shields and stuff that you're buying for any potential 1v1 deck, you can also play them in commander. They are legal in commander.
Yeah.
So, and any commander deck that has black in could run a Shieldred the Apocalypse because it's just so good. And in commander as well, where everybody draws so many cards, that's one of those cards that you've just got to get rid of in commander. You can't let it stick around because it will dominate the game.
Because you don't have to build everything right away super expensive. You can buy small pieces as you go, use them in your if you want to use them commander, fair enough, that's what you play. But it allows you to build up to this 60 card format deck, which I think most people would actually enjoy. They don't play it out of fear or being scared of the format, but trust me, it's really not that bad. When I started the game, I started with playing a commander deck against my Planeswalker deck, if you guys remember those, when they were actually still around. Literally a Jace Merfolk Planeswalker deck that had vanilla 3-mana 1/3s. That was what I was playing against someone's like kitted out commander deck. And that's how I started the game. And I decided, you know what, I want to improve my deck, and I started building more little pieces. I bought a Commander Precon, I think it was like the Mizzix one, and I went into Commander, and it was fun. But I really wanted to play that 1v1 format. It's what I saw, right, when I first started investigating Magic, and what I enjoyed. Because at the time, while Commander was big, it wasn't as big as it is now. And I went to go play the 1v1 format. I went to go play at, I think it was a pre-release for M19. That was my real first time doing that. And I loved it. It was fantastic. I stuck with it. I told myself I wasn't going to spend much money when I first started. I'm now more than 15k into the game, but I digress. Besides the point, it was really fun. It brought my joy, my passion into this hobby that I love very, very much. And I think more people could really find that passion. I'm not saying spend 15k, but I am saying you can enjoy the game if you give it a chance. Try the version of Magic that really started it all, which was 1 versus 1 60-card format games.
For sure. And I think you might be sort of leading on to, I mean, when I was having the preamble with Josh Price was recording, I came to the conclusion, and maybe other people come to a different one, that there's sort of two main barriers to a commander player going into 1v1. And there's the fear of the cost, which you kind of addressed by saying, well, you can borrow decks, you can build budget versions and slowly upgrade them. There are even pre-cons you can get into. But there's
also if you start winning and actually borrowing decks and winning, and you get prizes, you can actually put those prizes into other cards, trades, etc.
And I think you're leading us quite nicely into sort of what I wanted to come on to in sort of as a second point, because prior to us starting recording, Josh and I sort of came to the conclusion that there were probably two main reasons why Commander players didn't get into 1v1. And the first is the cost that I think we've covered quite extensively. You can, and you've got the option to borrow a deck, start small and build, or buy a precon even. But also there's the point of, why would I get into 1v1? What's the benefit for me? And obviously there's a benefit of it being fun. But I think people are a little bit scared potentially of the format being a bit challenging, and as opposed to a casual environment. And what I would say is, actually playing 1v1 will make you a better Commander player. And just as playing Commander will make you a better 1v1 player, I think. And I mean, I'll give an example that actually occurred to me quite recently. So by studying play patterns of 1v1 decks that exist in the meta, you can apply that to Commander decks that you own. So my first Commander deck, in fact, was a Oboon Muldier Ancestor, which is, traditional landfall deck, play a land, get some value. Obviously, what you want to do in that deck is get as many land drops per turn as possible with Azusa Lost but Seeking, various other bits and pieces.
Yeah.
So you can often find yourself with 3 land drops per turn. And I thought I was massive, big brain the size of a planet, by playing a bounce land, bouncing it back to my hand, and just doing that 3 times. But on the last one, that was when I return a basic land to my hand. Then, looking at what goes on in Modern, learning a bit more about it, I'm like, oh, this Amulet Titan thing, that's interesting. Now, what if I have an Amulet of Vigor on the battlefield while I'm doing that? Because now what's happening is, not only am I still getting those incremental land drops, I'm making my beasts off the Baloth, I'm generating my mana from Lotus Cobra or whatever, I'm also generating 2 mana per land drop. So now I'm doing all that stuff, but I've got 8 mana in my mana pool. Now that seems pretty broken to me in Commander. 8 additional mana per turn you can do loads with, especially in a Naya deck like that one. And there's probably hundreds of examples of this where you can emulate a modern play pattern in Commander, and everyone's like, wow, are we playing Modern now, Wally? But actually you're just rinsing them and winning the game.
That's such a really good point, actually. It's one I didn't actually think of until, because I'm not a massive Commander player. It's one when you mentioned before, I didn't really think of.
Exactly. So, and there's all these sorts of things, and if you sort of look at it in the other direction, if you're thinking about getting into 1v1 and you've got a Commander deck that you love, there is probably, in each format, a 1v1 deck that kind of works in the same way. So obviously we've talked about the similarities between my Landfall deck and Amulet Titan, maybe not quite as similar as it seems, but obviously there's aggro in every format, there's mid-range control, there's graveyard, all of that stuff exists in 1v1. So if you're good at that and if you enjoy it in Commander, give it a try in 1v1 as well. And you guys, obviously being the experts, will be best to point to those parallels. But I definitely haven't struggled to find something that's similar when I've been looking for a certain type of archetype in 1v1.
So you mentioned before about, like, one of the things you mentioned was people are scared, or there's a scared element to Commander players trying to play competitive. And I think I just want to, talk about that a little bit and break it down and why it's so scary. And I think the theory that I think it's so scary is that traditionally you get a Commander players sit around with a beer or some pizza or whatever you want to do, and they have like almost essentially a board game, like a really complicated board game.
And that is what it is.
Yeah. And they want to cast big, wonderful spells. They want to do all wonderful stuff. And I don't actually think it's there's the focus there isn't to win, right? The focus there is just to cast your spells, have fun, be with your friends. But when you move over to 1v1, the main focus of that game is to win the game.
Yes.
And sure, this person's trying to beat you, but it's not personal. It's how they manifest their fun and how they found fun within that game. And being scared to lose is probably something that a Commander player is well, there's a problem with Commander players, maybe. I don't know. Was that something you felt when you first came to 1v1 formats?
Not really, no. I mean, I like to play, in Commander, I like to do the thing. I like to do a big, splashy, ridiculous play. I'm not overly bothered about winning. What does annoy me is when I'm stopped from doing my thing, basically. So, and obviously coming into 1v1 for the first time, I didn't go in with any conception that I was going to win it, because the people... To be good at 1v1, you have to understand the deck at a much deeper level, and you need to understand the Commander deck, really, because you've got to understand many, many lines and many iterations of each line as well to understand how to properly sequence and optimize your plays, I guess. Is that a fair thing to say?
I'd say so, yeah.
And not only that, you've got to understand your opponent's deck as well, which in Commander, I mean, when I play Commander, I quite often switch off for my opponent's other turns. And, they do something that interacts with me, like, oh, I've destroyed your thing, Wally. It's like, okay, cool, so my thing's dead. But I'm often, except when we're making content and I've got to be engaged in what's going on for entertainment purposes, I do often switch off a little bit because I don't know my opponent's deck and they don't really know what they're going to draw into because they've got a 1 in 99 chance of it being anything. Whereas if you're in a standard deck where you're running 4-offs and that sort of thing, you can have a pretty good idea of what you're likely to draw. You certainly have a good idea of what you're not going to draw because you might have played 4 of something and some of it's in your graveyard or you've milled it or whatever.
Yeah.
But you certainly have, there's more maths going on, I think, is the point I'm trying to make. There's more statistics going on in your head in order to be a good player. It's like poker, basically, isn't it? You've got to try and guess what's in the middle, what's coming out next, what's in your opponent's hands.
Oh, that's so funny. This brings me to like this, to sidetrack a little bit, just a friend of mine, Mark Winkle, he told me a hilarious story of someone coming up to him speaking about Magic, and they were a Commander player. And that's so what do you play, Mark? Oh, I play constructed, 60 card formats. Oh yeah, I haven't tried the algorithm formats before, and I just oh man, that was I never heard it that way before. It was too funny. It was too funny to me.
But in many ways, that's kind of correct, isn't it? I mean, I guess there's the element of chance is certainly quite high, but you can certainly, if you can engage your thought at that level, it's going to have a demonstrable and measurable effect on your success. Whereas if you try to do it in Commander, you're just going to get confused, and you may as well just focus on what you're going to do. Maybe CEDH is different to that, and I kind of put CEDH, I'd leave that out of scope for this conversation, to be honest, because it's a very, very different animal.
Yeah, so CEDH is definitely more like 1v1 formats. You're not trying to make sure the entire table is having fun. It's a different format.
No, it's a zero fun game, zero sum game.
And it's what happens a lot in the more competitive kind of versions of the game. I genuinely, myself, I think that all of Magic really is a kind of zero-sum thing. As much as everyone loves to say that it's fun for everybody, I've played one too many Commander pods where someone storms off or someone does a turn for 15 minutes. I'm not sure about you, but I don't find myself having fun in those situations. It's what happens in Magic. It's not a bad thing. It's part of Magic. And I think people that enjoy doing that should try the 1v1 formats. Why not? If you are already used to wanting to do Storm Off or wanting to do a long convoluted combo or something like that, 1v1 is the perfect place for it. It's welcomed there. It's completely normal. It's not not something to be.
Do you want to know what? Do you want to know what I struggle with when I ever play Commander? And it's something that to me. So when I play a game of Magic, I want to have fun, but when you play a game or any game, to me, the purpose of that or the focus of that game is to win.
Yes.
The ride is fun and but the whole what focuses my gameplay or what focuses what I do is I want to win this game. Like that's it. It's like if you to play any board game, you want to win that board game because that's what focuses the game. And when I'm playing Commander, it's when they bring out the dice and they roll the dice to decide who they're gonna attack. And I'm like, when I first saw that, my mind popped out my ears. Like I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
I'm clearly the most logical person to attack. Just attack me.
But to be fair, Josh, you can do that. You can do that in 1v1 as well. It'll just be odds it's you and evens it's you as well.
Oh, it's so funny.
Yeah, I just like that absolutely baffled me, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to engage with this format very much.
Yeah, I've been there before.
But I guess something you mentioned, it sort of triggered some maths in my head. And obviously Commander players, they like to be the person playing and doing their thing. And you're actually going to spend a lot more of a 1v1 game being the person playing. Because for 3/4 of a Commander game, on average, it's not your turn. Whereas 50% of a 1v1 game is your turn. And obviously people tend to run more interaction in 1v1 as well, because I mean, who runs interaction in Commander these days? It's ridiculous. People don't even run lands in Commander anymore.
And you have a lot more agency as well. There's none of this playing check-in and waiting to see if one of your other opponents interacts with the combo that the player that's going off is doing. It's on you. Either you interact with it or no one interacts with it, which I find a little more refreshing. Yes, it's scary because you have to have the card, but you are going to. You're building your decks around that to actually have the card instead of, I have nothing. Do you guys have something? Oh, we don't. We lose. Which is I think is a nice thing. I like having that agency when I play Magic. Maybe some of you listening do as well, and might want to give it a go.
I've always said that Commander should be the secondary format you play. 1v1 should be the first format you play. And I tell you why. Commander, the experience of Commander is to de-stress or to have a different, an escapism from whatever's going on in your life or whatever, whether it be home life or whatever, but also to de-stress after a long day tournament. I mean, I presume, I know at least me and Luis have day 2 at a big major tournament before. Just to be able to play your game of Commander after you've secured that day 2 is an amazing feeling, because you've put your mind away from your deck you've been playing all day. You're not there competitively. You're just having a laugh with some beers, with some friends, enjoying the experience of that weekend. Secondly, as well, that even if you scrub out, say you 0-3 a tournament or 0-2 a tournament and you're done, you've still got that format there that you can just sit, play, enjoy. It's your pet deck. You put your heart and soul into it, and you're playing with your friends. And I think the fact that you play competitive Magic alongside Commander enhances both formats. You get that experience of the competitive side, grizzing it out. That the pressure, the drama, all that good stuff, the excitement of competitive Magic, and then you sort of de-stress and you play your casual game of Commander with your pet deck.
Yeah, so that really resonates what you're saying, because playing one makes the other more fun. Because if you play 1v1 as well as Commander, in your 1v1 games, you can play a really sweaty, win at all costs type of, that kind of way, without feeling bad, without feeling like you're violating the social contract, which is a very important part of Commander. And and people who feel like that in Commander, well, maybe you should try and understand why you feel that way. But then also, if you play Commander as well as 1v1, Commander becomes less serious, I guess. And you can just have a laugh, because this game that you've got statistically a 25% chance of winning isn't the be-all and end-all of your Magic gameplay. So, I completely agree that, I mean, it's interesting how playing one makes you better at the other, but it also makes you enjoy the other more as well.
So I've noticed that with when I've played Commander players, they really know weird and wonderful combinations. They know how mechanics work that I may have never been exposed to. They know card pool that I would never have even looked at. They know all these rules. The rules the Commander player knows are usually quite extensive, and that can translate really well into 1v1 format, particularly if you look at like sealed and card evaluation, because Commander players, like, I'll look at a 6-7 mana mythic and be like, nope, next. But a Commander player will look at that and be like, oh, this could fit in this, or this can do that, and find a use for that. And that's a really good, I think, skill set for sort of like sealed and or draft sort of formats where you've got to assess and evaluate those cards, because that's something that I'm quite weak at.
Yeah. Because I guess if you're playing Commander and you're really focused in on what's going on, you have to know what the threat is. So an opponent plays a card, you've got to understand actually how much does this impact me? How likely is that to take them to a win in the next few turns? And that's the same skill set. It's not directly the same, but it's definitely very similar to what you should be doing when you're playing with a limited card pool, whether it's draft or sealed, as you say. So
ultimately as well, like when you look at sort of like competitive 1v1 formats, what that can offer a Commander player is understanding on timings and stuff like that, because you'll often, as you said before, you'll switch off and then it'll be your turn. You're like, oh, is it my turn? And something died and you're like, oh, fair one. And then you'll play your instant speed spells at sorcery speed when everyone who's a competitive
I'm so
Magic
guilty
player,
of that. So guilty of that.
Anyone who's a competitive Magic player will know that your instant speeds cards, you don't want to get rid of them. Like you just think of every reason, every reason not to use that, because you want it in your hand for that critical moment when you can either sway the game, use it to not die, or ultimately win that game.
I think for Wally, it's Lightning Bolt would like to know your location. I've seen one too many sorcery speed Lightning Bolts with you.
I am king of the sorcery speed Lightning Bolt, and you can see me do it many times on camera. But I think that it's a good point you make there, Josh, because I think playing 1v1 gets you very good at knowing when to play a spell. which
Yeah.
is if it's an instant speed spell, keeping it in your hand till the very last minute, using it because then you're using it only if you definitely have to. Firstly, so maintaining that card advantage for as long as you can, but also maintaining that information advantage for as long as you can.
Yeah.
So you'll learn that for playing 1v1. You'll learn the value of it from playing 1v1.
It's resource management.
Yeah, exactly. Resource management. Exactly what it is. But playing Commander maybe teaches you a little bit more about the how, because obviously priority is the system on which Magic is based, and priority in Commander is much more complicated because it goes in a circle of 4 people. So you understand priority and ultimately the stack as well at probably a slightly deeper level than you might do if you play 1v1. Is that, I don't know, maybe that's fair to say. I don't play Modern, which is obviously where a lot of stuff happens on the stack in Modern, so maybe that's an exception to the rule. But certainly I'd say from a priority point of view, this is where the two things dovetail quite well together to make you a better and more well-rounded Magic player.
No, absolutely. I mean, the Commander board states and stack states are much more complex than you'll get in most 1v1 formats. For people that are afraid of, 1v1 is going to be too complicated, I don't know what's happening, I don't know what's going on. Well, you already deal with more complicated ones. You really do. It's natural for that to happen in Commander, so don't fear that. Your skill set is very useful.
I'm going to argue this point about complicated stack within 1v1 compared to Commander, because what's changed since the last since MH2 was the fact we've got free spells now, and so you've got grief, subtlety, solitude, all those good stuff, and that really adds a complexity to the stack, which, if from a Commander perspective, really gives you the right tools to approach these sort of formats, because amount of times you've the grief's on the stack, and then the subtlety of that grief, or there's then there's some sort of a not of this world, or some, or not the world, sorry,
not dead after all.
Not dead after all, yeah. And then there's a force negation, and then all these free spells that are now coming to the game, which I think are quite fun, whether they're good for the formats or not. This sort of stack knowledge is very it's very going to be very useful in your sort of journey, whether it be new or old journey into the competitive space.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're right. And Modern is definitely an exception to that. And I think the other thing about, and particularly in Modern compared to Pioneer or Standard as well, which is maybe something that Commander players are a little scared of, is that in Modern it can just be turn 2, I do this, that, and the other, and you're dead. Game 2, let's go. And you've got no
that's
idea
a little bit of a hyperbole, I think, in that a lot of people actually think, coming from the Commander space. Yes, you can sometimes lose on turn 2. Doesn't happen very often. It tends to be one deck that really does that to people, which is Josh's favorite, good old Amulet Titan. Most other decks will not do that.
That deck can get in the toilet. I do not like that.
Most of the decks cannot do something that quickly, especially through interaction. It is possible, but rarely. Modern is usually a turn 3, turn 4 format in terms of that's when the big stuff happens and can decide a game, but it doesn't mean that's when it always decides a game. There's more than a handful of games that I've played even recently where they go for 12, 15, 20 turns. It is more common than you think.
So the first time I ever played Legacy, I borrowed a deck. You borrow a deck before you want to know if you want to invest in a format, and this was a few years back, so it wasn't nearly as expensive as it is today. But I borrowed I used D&T or
Death and Taxes,
and my second game on that FNM was against was it Show and Tell? No, the Show and Tell in an Emrakul or a Gristlebrand or whatever. And it was it was the one, what's it called, with the enchantment, the red enchantment, and
Sneak Attack.
Sneak Attack, yeah. So Sneak and Show it's called. So they played a Sneak Attack, and then they put on a Grizzlebrand, and then they hit me. They drew 7 cards, and they hit me, and I was like, "How's my mono white deck gonna beat this deck? How is this even fair in this format?" Game 2, I pulled a card called a lovely card. I don't know if you heard of it. It's called Caracas.
Yeah, I think I've heard of this card.
So my point on this is that even though like they might get games where, oh my god, I've just died on turn 3, turn 4, or whatever, the format can manage that. And by having these experience of losing, because you don't learn by winning. You don't. If you 5-0 a league, you'll learn a lot less than you 1-4 a league, for example. If you by losing these games or having these interactions where you lose so rapidly, you'll then start thinking, "Ooh, how do I answer these questions?" And then you look at the format and you think, "Oh, actually, there's lots of tools in this format I can do, whatever format that may be, to answer these questions." Like, um,
And speaking of tools
Go
to
on.
answer questions, I think there's a big elephant in the room that we haven't addressed yet, which is one of the biggest difference between Commander and 1v1, and the thing that people do find very scary, and that's sideboarding.
Oh
Because
yeah, that's funnily
suddenly
enough.
I'm going to this format where I've got to decide on these 15 cards that are going to be my Hail Mary in a matchup that isn't good for me.
Yeah.
Man,
And
if
not only have
only
I got to decide what they
someone
are, but
had
I've got
made
to
a
decide.
video about sideboarding that would help these kind of situations.
Well, I watched a really good podcast, or I listened to a really good podcast about it a few days ago, actually. Wasn't
Did
it
you?
you guys who did that?
Wow, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
a little bit of a self plug there, I think. Yeah.
No, it was a really good podcast. And for that reason, we probably shouldn't spend too much time talking about sideboarding because it's there.
If you guys want to learn a little more about sideboarding, especially in the 1v1 space, take a listen to our previous episode where we had a good old Helena on speaking about sideboarding. It'll help a lot, especially for anyone who's looking to get into 1v1 formats. It will give you a lot of information on how to sideboard, what sideboarding really is, and how to really approach it without being too afraid. We highly, obviously without upping ourselves too much, we touch on a lot of the aspects of what makes it so difficult and what to do in certain situations. And if you find yourself stuck, and that might, and that being the reason why you don't want to play 1v1 because it's just too difficult or too scary, take a listen, give it a try, see what you think of it after you've listened to our little podcast about sideboarding, and just attempt it. You're only really going to learn by attempting things. You're not going to learn much by just waiting around. You have to try it. That's the way of the world.
Sideboarding actually, just while we're talking about it, is one of the best ways where you can put your own individual spin on a deck that you've seen online. So say if you net deck something, say Amulet Titan that we talked about before, or whatever deck, that sort of very few sort of flex spots in those decks. Sideboarding is one of the things where you can put your own spin on it, because you look at your meta, you look at who you want to beat, or what you want to beat, or what cards you actually essentially like to play in certain matchups. That's your space to have a bit of freedom. Or so if you're a brewer or you like to innovate, it's one of the best ways to do it within the sideboard, which is something that might attract people coming from the sort of casual space, where they can brew and put their own spin on things, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's a good point. And what I'd say is sideboarding isn't, well, it can be scary, but it doesn't have to be, because there's great resources out there, like the podcast that you guys did. And there's also the opportunity to just ask people in your LGS. I mean, before we started recording, you guys were talking for about 10 minutes about is it feeling sideboarding, weren't you? So people are there, and people love to have conversations about this sort of thing because it's our hobby. We love talking about Magic the Gathering. And, if somebody asked me about my CEDH deck, I could talk to them for 2 hours about it. That can be our next podcast if you want.
It's definitely one of those things. And let me tell you, there's nothing that feels better when you go mega brain on how you sideboard and defeat your opponent specifically because of your sideboard card and pulling it at the exact right moment. It feels so good. And it's something that every Magic player needs to experience. Just dunking on little Timmy when you pull the right card it just feels so good.
So how do I go about then? So I am Commander player. All I do is play Commander. I build budget Commander decks. I've got a stack of them at home, and all I do is build Commander decks. Go to my local LGS, play Commander. But I've got the little itch. I've got the little fancy. How would you recommend first getting into a 1v1 format?
I would say, I mean, Arena is obviously good to an extent, but let's put Arena to one side for now because it is just it's almost a separate thing.
Yes,
I would say find out where your nearest LGS is. You probably already know, but find out when their standard night is or pioneer night. I think modern is maybe a little bit hard to get into as a first 1v1 format, but certainly there are standard and pioneer decks that can almost play themselves. So find out when that is and just see if somebody will lend you a deck and get down there. You'll make some new friends, you'll have fun. People and people will happily explain the deck to you and say, this is the hand you should keep, this is the hand you should bin, this is, the play patterns you should be looking to do. People will happily sit there and talk to you about it because it's their deck and they like to talk about it.
And the thing about competitive people who want to play their competitive decks is they need opponents to play against, just as a commander player needs their friends to play with. They need opponents, and you'll find that a lot of competitive spaces are very welcoming. It is daunting sitting down to a game first time. Someone might be hyper competitive, but if you just spoke to that person and if you lose, say like, oh, what can I do? Have you got any tips against your deck? 9 out of 10 times that person will be very welcoming and very helpful and give you tips on that deck particularly, or that matchup particularly, and then use that, get that experience, and then you come back and then you start winning prizes, and those prizes can be traded away, sold, whatever, to then eventually go towards your own deck or new cards, etc.
Exactly. And 1 out of 10 times that person will be Josh, who goes, herder, infect, goat face. and that's what you'll get, which is not very helpful. But most of the time you'll be perfectly fine, and you'll get someone helpful in teaching you the game of Magic.
Because it's in their interest as well for you to play the deck well. Because if you're playing somebody who's not playing the deck properly and making suboptimal plays, you're not improving. You're potentially even getting worse because you improve at the same level as the people around you. So yeah, people aren't going to be salty if you beat them with their own deck, because that's a learning opportunity for them.
It's quite a dirty experience when you beat a player who's brand new because they made the wrong play, and you're like,
yeah.
I'll often be like, you might not want to do that. Why don't you try this instead? Even if it's a detriment to myself, but I think I'd rather have a really good game of Magic.
Yeah.
And help
I let people take back whatever mistake they were making because they didn't. Yeah. It feels better as a player. For a competitive side, I think most competitive players don't want to beat you just because you didn't understand something. They'll let you take it back most of the time and learn from the experience. They don't want to just defeat you because they can.
Depends on the setting, right? If it's like an F&M setting.
Exactly. No, I'm not talking about a big tournament because those are big prizes, but like an F&M setting. And this is where we really want people to get started. We're not saying, oh, drop all your commander cards and go play an RCQ or whatever. That's not what we're saying right now. Right now we're focusing on just starting out the 1v1 journey with F&M level play. It's something that anyone can do. It's welcoming for, it's welcome to everyone. There is no barrier to access in terms of you have to be this good to play. No, nothing like that. It is about as casual 1v1 can be in the more competitive side of things. And really, what I really want to bring home is give it a chance. Try it. You might enjoy it more than you think. You have nothing to lose. You try it once. If you don't like it, fine. But if you do, hey, fantastic. Maybe you found something else you can do, something else you can enjoy. It's we all love this hobby of Magic. That's why we all play it. Why don't you play it some more? enjoy it with us.
Exactly. What could be better than more Magic?
There's so many ways to experience the game, right? And so many ways to experience the game. And there's this stigma of like, oh, I don't play this because of this, or don't play that, or that's I'm not playing this because of whatever reason, which isn't experience. Then you don't know what you're missing out on, and the game is so vast and so wide. Can we just talk about a bit on? We've quite heavily talked about pricing, but one of the things about the cost of the game comes to the fact that people look at a deck online or look at a deck that they want to play and think, oh, this deck is $1,000 or whatever. But can we just? Well, I don't know you think, but this is how I do it. Is like I like to have a collection or build towards a collection where the right collection means that your conversion rate into these decks isn't $1,000, isn't this, isn't that. So for a good example, Luis alluded before, is if you get hold of your mana bases and the correct mana base. I have a folder just full of every time a standard deck rotates, for example, I'll put the mana base in there, shock lands, stuff like that, because these cards like translate well across different formats, and then you'll realize that when you come to look at these modern decks or these pioneer decks, they're not actually $400, $600, whatever. I'm actually only $50 away from this deck, or I say dollars because that's what I'm looking at MTG Goldfish, but it's that sort of it's looking at it in a way which isn't as daunting and isn't as terrifying as the fact that in a vacuum this deck is $1,000. But if you have a bit of a collection and you've traded away some cards for other cards that you more useful cards, it's not it's not as it can't be it's not as scary as it sounds in a vacuum.
You'll find if you build up the mana base, even if you do it slowly over time, once you own the mana base, you will actually own the most expensive parts of every single deck that you really want to play. And the cost of buying into those decks is tiny compared to what you actually thought it was. That's what it is. I think the best investment you can ever make in Magic is a mana base. If that's the first thing you start getting into, you'll find that you'll be able to play anything you really want to play, for the most part at least, and won't be as thrown off by the cost of it. It's really one of the most beneficial ways to start playing many decks, if that's what you like to do. I enjoy playing as many decks as I can. I think it's very fun, and I highly recommend it.
So before you pull the trigger on buying any cards, I like to use this analogy. If you look at Magic and compare Magic to, say, like a PlayStation game. So how much does a new PlayStation game cost now? 60, 70 quid?
Yeah, 60, 70
pounds. The last one I bought, it was expensive.
So £70. You play that game for, say, 20, 30 hours playtime.
Yeah.
You're done with that game. You either keep it on your shelf or you go to sell it. Now, you sell that game for what? 30, 20 quid max?
If you look at it, yeah.
Okay, so you've got that you've bought that game, that money's gone, essentially, is what my point there. If you buy a set of, let's say a set of Steam Vents, or Shocklands or whatever you want to, whatever land base, you spent £40 on that play set of lands. You play with those lands for 6-7 months. You're now thinking, actually, I don't play this game anymore, or I don't want to play these lands anymore, or I'm just not interested in these colours. You go to sell them, you'll sell them for £35-40. My point is, you buy these cards, you buy these mana bases, it is not dead money. It's not, this is £1,000 down the drain. It's not. If you buy £1,000 deck, say, in a vacuum, you'll probably sell it later on for £850. That means for however many months you've had that game for, which is substantially longer than you've had the PlayStation game for, you've had that much of entertainment, and you can sell it back for pretty much nearly what you paid for.
Yeah. And mana bases are the best for this. It's more than most cards. Mana bases kind of stay where they are. They go up and down just like every card, but not as much. Shocklands are the prime example of this. They've existed for a very long time. They're always somewhere around the £10 to £15 mark. That's where they've been. That's where they always sit around. Even when they get reprinted 1,000 times, they still sit around there. It's just what happens with them. You'll be surprised how much money you actually retain from what you buy and the sellability of it. Yes, it takes a little effort to sell it back, but it's really nothing compared to, like Josh was saying, a PlayStation game or some other form of entertainment, which is usually just money down the drain after you've done it, right?
I'm just trying to contextualize it in the terms of that. In the terms of entertainment space, it's not dead. So it's almost me saying, don't be put off by the fact that you've got to spend this money on this, because it's not dead money. That money still exists. It's not like a PlayStation game.
You're buying an asset in many. It's like the same as buying a house, isn't it? You're buying an asset.
Sometimes that'll be worth less. Sometimes it's worth more. Sometimes you get stung by the meta, so you bans and stuff like that. Like when Oko was banned, a lot of people probably lost a couple of £100. But that's when the more you're into these games, the more you're into 1v1 formats or competitive formats, you'll make more informed decisions on what you do with your money. Things like Shocklands, Lands Base, it's pretty safe bet. And they're easily sold as well.
Yeah. Because people are always in the market for them. And as you say, obviously the Allied fetch lands are getting reprinted this summer in Modern Horizons 3. So they'll go down in value a little bit for a few months, but they'll just go straight back up to where they are now. No doubt about that at all.
Plus, if you do, like I said, because I've always, every time I played Standard and forgot the useful lands, I've just kept them in a folder. When they rotate back in, or you play a format where they're played, then you've got the old original versions of these lands, and it looks pretty cool. So I think.
Yeah. I'm just showing your age a little bit there, mate. Is that what it is?
And that's really what it comes down to, guys. There's a lot of avenues to come and join and play 1v1 formats. It's not. It's not this boogeyman that sometimes people make it out to be. It really is a friendly space. It's something we want to welcome everyone to. I hope everyone listening. I know we'll get a lot of people that aren't really Commander players or more already 1v1 players, but welcome the Commander players, welcome the new players to come in and join us in 1v1. I think it's something that's really needed. I want the game to stay strong and keep going for as long as I live. I love the game. It's one of it's,
a tip for people who want to get Commander players to play the game is build decks. Have decks available to blend.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we say, this can be your testing bed, so take advantage of it.
Exactly. And I want to thank everyone for listening. And I know we did a lot of rambling and moving around and everything we were talking about, but I do appreciate everyone listening to us. If you can hit a like and a subscribe and maybe a comment or two down in the comment section, we'd really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us on this episode of Battle Chads. Stay tuned as we have hopefully a nice surprise for anyone who's in the UK scene of Magic. For our next episode. I hope you'll enjoy the mystery that I've put upon you. But thanks again, guys, and take care and have a good one.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Cheers, Wally. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Wally.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.